Hello, I'm Marucs Lee, and I'll be doing Wylock lesson 27 for 7th grade math. So starting with page 1, we're going to evaluate the expressions. We have square root of 24 here. Oops. We have the square root of 24, and when we analyze and when we simplify square roots, we look for if it's a perfect square or not, or a complete square, whatever you'd like to call it. This in this case 24 is not, so we could break it down into its factors. 24 is also 4 times 6, which is, you want to break these down all to everything you can. So 4 goes down to 2 and 2, and 6 goes down to 2 and 3, and then you kind of look for pairs of numbers. If it makes more sense, I could circle. We have one pair of 2's. We have two 2's, and then there's an extra 2 and an extra 3, and those are going to stay in our radical. So we want our 2 on the outside, and then on the inside just stays rad 6. Like I said, when we do square roots, we look for complete squares. In this case, it's 121. The square root of that is just 11. And same thing here. We're looking for the square root of 9. But we have a negative on the outside. So what we want to do is we want to first evaluate the square root and then apply the negative. So the square root of 9 is 3, and we just put that negative on there, negative 3. Simple. Okay. Now, using square roots to solve quadratic equations. So we have 7c squared equals 100. So in order to solve for c, we first have to divide both sides by 7. So we get c squared is equal to 100 over 7. And then when we take the square root of both sides, we take the square root of this entire fraction. So we will get plus or minus. Let me rewrite that. So when we square root a fraction, we square root the top number and the bottom number. So if we think about that, we could square root the top number 100, which is 10, and then 7 is a prime number, so when we square root it, it just stays square root of 7. Now something important to note is that I will move down here actually. So we have plus or minus 10 over rad 7, and a lot of times having a radical or having a square root in your denominator in a fraction is not acceptable or not completely simplified. So if we write out both of our solutions, this is the positive solution and this is the negative solution. In order to get this square root, or get rid of this square root without changing your answer, is we want to do something that's called rationalizing. And what you do is you multiply by the square root of the denominator over itself, because square root of 7 divided by the square root of 7 is equal to 1. So technically, we're not changing the value of the fraction. And this will become 10 times the square root of 7 is 10 square root of 7. And then square root of 7 times square root of 7, that's the same thing as the square root of 7 squared. And we know that square roots and exponents will cancel out. So we just get 10 square root of 7 over 7, and then we also get the negative 10 square root of 7 over 7. And that's that. Whoops. Moving on. We're asked to solve the equation. We have x minus 7, the quantity squared, is equal to 6. In order to solve this, we have to get rid of this squared. So, well, how do we get rid of this squared? Well, actually, we just simply want to square root both sides, and this will get rid of the square, so we'll just be left with x minus 7 is equal to the square root plus minus. Make sure you remember the plus minus of 6. And then in order to get x on its own, we get plus minus square root of 6 plus 7. And since we have our plus minus, it's going to yield 2 solutions. I'll put them down here under number 3. We could ignore that. We're going to have our positive solution is positive rad 6 plus 7, and our negative solution is negative rad 6 plus 7. And lastly, we're going to be doing number 15 on the 4th page, and this is 24 plus 8p squared equals 12. So whenever we solve for a variable, obviously we want to get it on its own as much as we can. So here in this case we subtract 24 on both sides. We're left with 8p squared is equal to negative 12. Divide by 8 on both sides. P squared is equal to negative 12 over 8, which is the same thing as p squared is equal to, we're just going to simplify our fraction, this is going to be 3 over 2, right? And then now when we square root to find p, if we remember, we can't take the square root of negative numbers. So in this case, we're going to actually get p is not going to equal to anything, and we don't have any solution. So just remember, when we take the square roots of negative numbers, it yields no solution. It was a quick lesson today. Hopefully that was helpful, and thank you for watching.